Right, I'm standing at the corner of 4th and Walnut in Louisville, Kentucky, where Thomas Merton had his transcendent and eminent experience. There's a little sign right there. Of course, he wrote his autobiography, The 7-Story Mountain. Another person obsessed with mountains in a good way is my friend Ken Lowry, who is also slightly obsessed with Thomas Merton. And I know that because we got to have an amazing conversation last week and dropped into a really deep place really quickly. It wasn't totally surprising, but was definitely totally welcome. So without further ado, he's just Ken. I see you drinking a little coffee right now. What are you imbibing at the moment?
Oh, this is just the standard. I think our hospital. So I'm in the hospital right now.
Oh no.
I'm on call today. So I work in the hospital. I'm not a patient in the hospital.
I immediately jumped to there's a catastrophe or an illness or something. You're like, no, I work here, which is
right,
great
exactly.
Because what I want to do is get to know a little bit more of you and your context. We have this sort of Twitter / YouTube facilitated relationship.
Yeah.
But I just don't know that much about you. I just recently learned that you're in you're in the state of Oregon.
Yep.
If Twitter is to be believed.
That's right. Yeah. So I live outside of Salem, Oregon.
Okay.
So about an hour south of Portland. And you're in Arizona, is that right? Or
I was in Arizona, grew up there, but now
Okay.
I live in Indiana, southwestern Indiana. And then technically
nice.
right now I'm in a city, it's called Oakland City, not to be confused with Oakland, California, Oakland City, Indiana, where my son goes to school and plays baseball, which is
nice.
the reason for this little remote setup. So I was like, how am I going to do this? I'm trying to be a little more professional about the YouTube channel with mics and everything. And I'm like a baseball field, and I've got my chair. I'm in one of those chairs that moms and dads sit in for sports games, but I've got nothing
Nice.
to prop up my laptop. And I'm looking around, and down in this little ditch, there's this white table, which you are now sitting on as the screen
Nice.
of this laptop. I mean, it's too far to say it was God providing a ram for Abraham, but that's what was going through my mind. It was all of a sudden this table appears in a ditch, and so here we are.
Yeah, nice. There's something about the symbolism of the place we find ourselves as sort of exiles and wanderers, and where we are and what we're doing and what finds us here together. That seems proper to this context of finding the white table in a ditch. I like it.
The white table in the ditch. Well, if I remember, and I was just thinking back to the Paul Vanderklay stream that you were on with Jordan, and it's right as you were ending, Paul put a link in there, and I was like, yeah, I'm feeling it. I want to talk to Ken about church. So I jump in, and then you're like, man, I got to go back to work. And then I'm stuck with Paul, which is just, such a letdown because he's such a boring guy.
Yeah.
No, it ended up being great, but to be honest, that is what I was feeling called to join, that is to talk to you specifically about some of the comments that you have made.
I don't know how to say it. Like, I haven't been to church in a long time, like since COVID. But in the journey of not being at church, I find myself continually more of a Christian. And I would like to go to church, but I haven't found any place that I feel like I can actually go to church.
You've brought up this like inability to find a church while having a progressively deepening relationship with something that you're calling God or Jesus.
History, right? Like I broke into doing this sort of whole online stuff and YouTube through having a conversation with John Vervaeke, where he pushed me exactly on the point of like, well, you know, who is Jesus really? Like, what's really happening when Jesus, specifically on the cross, when Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that sort of like, that's become this thing for me where like, I mean, it's taken me to depths I could never imagine, because I've just not let go of that as a quest of like, what the heck are we talking about when we're talking about a person who is also God? Like, what the heck are we talking about there? Like I don't have an answer.
And I'm also just curious as to how you sort of see the sort of fellowship that you have been developing with some of these folks on YouTube. So that's what I kind of want to talk to you about. So you can take that, whatever place feels alive with that sort of set of questions.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, well, that's a bunch of stuff. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm really like, I felt bad because when I had to jump off that stream, because I was excited to talk to you, because obviously we've had some exchanges on Twitter and comment sections and those sorts of things. So my relationship with Jesus and my relationship with the church is really interesting because, you know, I grew up very, you know, Anabaptist, sort of at the intersection of like Mennonite and Southern Baptist, right? Like, if you can imagine where that would come together, is where I grew up. And I watched your conversation with Jordan Hall and how you talked about the experience of going through church splits. That was a very present reality in my upbringing. You know, relatively traumatic losses of friends through that experience.
How old were you during some of those? If I can double click into that.
Yeah, I think let's see. The first one would have been 2004, I think. 2003, 2004. So I would have been 10 or 11 years old.
So interestingly, the church split that I described was in 2003. Let's see, I would have been 23 at that time. So now we're getting our ages sort of sorted out here a little bit, but maybe there was something in the water.
Well, I think so. I mean, I think there's foment. I mean, I don't know. It's so hard to pick, right? Like where you're going to start in terms of chronological movements, but it does seem like in the early 2000s, right, with the advent of the internet and those sorts of things, you started to see this like an exacerbation of the spirit of Protestantism. That is, you know, if we need to make something better, we'll just go start a new church. Some sort of feeling.
Oh yeah. So I didn't mean to derail your story. You talked about the church splits, and I was just trying to get to like sort of your age, just trying to understand how that might have, you know, affected you relative to your age and your sort of understanding of all these. You know, what are all these grown-ups doing here, getting all pissed off?
Yeah, I mean, it was very formative because my dad was actually one of the leaders of the church, and so he was very much sort of, I would say, you know, it was quite difficult emotionally for him and sort of for my siblings. I had some older brothers that were a part of, you know, I don't know, they would have these men's meetings, right? And so they were there seeing him get aggressively talked at, you know, and that was hard for them. And that, you know, that sort of led down a string of disintegrations in my family. There was a further church split again when I think I was maybe 15. And then like right after I went to college, leaving that context, there was another one. And since then that church has split maybe 3 or 4 times, you know, so that sense of like the ground beneath my feet, because the church was, in my upbringing, was everything. I didn't have friends outside the church. It was a very sort of separated from the world. We're just pilgrims here, that sort of sense. And so, it was a very sort of one-dimensional aspect of church life. So then, that sense of sort of the earth splitting beneath your feet was a very, very, very deeply felt sense for me, I think, from the get-go.
And so you go to college, and I mean, did you have your career path sort of like mapped out, and you're still on that, or were there some other, deviations from there?
Yeah, more or less. I went to college. I went to Biola University down in LA because I was very interested in the question.
I know Biola very well. I have a niece at Biola currently. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Nice. Yeah. So I graduated there in 2016. I thought I wanted to go to med school when I went there. Decided that physician assistant PA made a lot more sense, and I'm quite happy with that decision now. But I was very interested. The reason I went to Biola over other places was I was really interested in this, this God business and Christianity and what was going on. I always sort of felt, for a long time, it was sort of performative for me, more or less. But at the same time, there was also a deep sense of like, I feel like there's something here, but it never really landed for me. And that really didn't happen until after college, when I was in an evangelical church, because, Biola is a broadly evangelical school.
Sure.
I was, I got the level of biblical education that Biola gives you, which is not nothing for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's in the name, right? What does Biola stand for?
Yeah.
Is it
the Bible Institute of Los Angeles?
There it is.
Yeah. So, but then I was in an evangelical church. I was like 23 years old, I think. And I there was a distinct moment where I remember thinking, like, is this all there is? Like, is this all there is to this? And then I had some experiences when I was working in the emergency department. Before getting into PA school, you sort of have to rack up hours. So I did that working in an emergency department here in the same hospital where I work now, as a physician assistant.
This is in Oregon. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So my wife's from here, so that's why I ended up here.
Gotcha.
But I had there were a couple particularly distressing encounters with death, particularly the death of children. And there was, on one of those occasions, I had been working for about, I worked a 12-hour shift, and then they needed more help, so I stayed extra, and it was about 2 a.m. I'd been there for maybe 15 hours, and I was pretty tired. And this, he was about 9 months old, if I remember correctly. Kid came in. It was a SIDS case, sudden infant death syndrome, no apparent cause, and myself and one other person were the people doing CPR on him, and we worked on him for about 2 hours. Just a beautiful, perfect baby. And he died. And the mother is there in the room, and there's I can't really talk about it without getting emotional still, but
no, of course. There's
a sound that a mother makes when you tell her that her child dies, that is like, I mean, it's like nothing else. And there's after that experience, I sat down on a computer and just started writing. And yeah, that there was something that shifted for me there.
Wow. I don't even want to imagine it any more vividly than you just painted that. And I'm also struck by how you went to writing. And honestly, if I'm being honest, and I should be honest, what's coming up for me is that reminds me of Sam Harris. Sam Harris had a very visceral reaction to the 9/11 attacks, and he went from, like, I think he was a philosophy major. I don't know what he was, but it was like, I need to write about that. Like, something just shifted in me, and I need to contain it in some way. Okay, so you go to write, and what happens next?
Yeah, I just what emerged out of that writing was really, it was just a question of, what am I doing this for? Which started as a personal question of why am I engaging in a career that is going to expose me to this much suffering, and how am I going to relate to that? And where that ended up taking me is, I suppose this whole journey in some sense, but really a deep sort of shift in terms of how I related to the existential questions. What is death? What makes life worth living? What is meaningful enough to be able to sustain me, to sustain this mother, to sustain my coworkers when we go through an experience like that. And because I was very, it was an ever-present reality. I mean, I've, at this point in my career, death is something that I'm very familiar with, in the sense of yeah, we could talk more about that. I don't, but it created in me a sense of how to say this, like a shift from wanting to know any sort of like answer. Like, it was very clear to me that there wasn't an answer that was going to give me a sense of it being okay. It was very clear to me that these were questions that were meant to be lived. And I suppose that is sort of, the real shift that happened for me, which then led to a complete sort of, I went down the sort of Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pageau, John
So this would,
Vervaeke
like you said,
track.
it was around 2016, 2017. That's the time frame.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I picked up Jordan's 12 Rules for Life, and
Gotcha. Are you familiar with B.J. Miller at all?
I don't think I've heard that name.
So B.J. Miller is a doctor, and he got on my radar from a TED Talk that he gave around 2015, 2016 on death. And I really don't have to do much more than ask you to trust me that you will appreciate watching it. And I can like link to it below for others, and I'll send it to you. But it's the most powerful TED Talk I know, at least, reckoning with death. Let's just leave it that way.
Yeah, I'll check that out. That's great.
Yeah. Okay, so you read the book. Your 12 Rules for Life. You get on YouTube, you see, Jordan Peterson. So which aspects? I feel like there's several different Jordan Petersons, or there are, so many different faces or custom suits to Jordan Peterson, that people find access to.
Yeah. It has to be deep, and deep moves you tectonically, and it's not a trivial thing. But that's better than happiness.
And I'm not taking down that tweet or acknowledging that my tweet violated the Twitter rules. Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
What were some of the things that really resonated for you, about him, among other, thought leaders or personalities, you could find on YouTube?
Yeah, I think the big thing was, there were so many smaller things, but the big thing was just sort of switching the way that I lived my life from a sort of, just get through to get to the thing you might want, or, do what you have to do to get by, to a let's see how good we can make this thing. That was probably, that's one big thing. And then the other big thing was just shifting, opening up the Bible, right?
Really?
Sort of breaking off it when for me, those biblical lectures, the first biblical lectures from 2017.
There's an idea in Christianity that the image of God is a Trinity.
Sort of just like blew open my capacity to interact with the Bible, and it became interesting again.
Yeah. Because he did like 2.5 hours on like the opening verse, the first, class that he has on it. He gets this theater, I think it's in Toronto, hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people. And he just riffs for hours, and he hasn't even really started it. And it's just like, so this is possible. This is an aspect. So you and I both went to Bible college, and we had very skilled and well-meaning and like good-hearted professors, but nobody that I'd ever seen or experienced took it on the way that Peterson did. And that was kind of similar for me. My entry into Peterson actually started before that with kind of the Sam Harris Peterson debate / dialogue, initially first on their podcast channels. And they've got this whole thing where they're going back and forth on the definition of truth and just totally missing each other. And like the whole thing kind of blows up, and Sam's kind of like, oh, I don't even think we can continue this conversation because we can't even agree on truth.
And I will come back to a second conversation with you, duly chastened, and revise how we proceed talking about this. But
yes, well, I might emerge duly chastened as well, but because I think we're differing on something fundamental. But
let's crowdsource this, because I'm not following the plot here, if in fact that's true.
And then the cool thing that happened next is that they both listened back to it and said they practiced Rule Omega, which is like a Jordan Hall thing, which is like listen for the signal in everything that the person that you're talking to is saying. Don't just count it all as noise, because they were just, it was a very noisy initial conversation. And then whatever humility they approached with that, they both went back and listened and said, I see where I missed you.
I was actually going to start with a bit of an apology, because I listened to our talk twice, trying to figure out where it went off the rails. It actually went okay for the first hour, and then we got bogged down in the truth issue. And I think I made a couple of strategic errors, which I hope not to repeat. I had just read a number of things that you had written, and I told you a lot about what you thought instead of letting you say it.
And then they got back together, and then that's led to a very dynamic, lively relationship, and now, as far as I understand it, a friendship between two very unlikely bedfellows.
Yeah. Well, and I think that I haven't heard the term Rule Omega before, but I like that. That idea of listening with positive intent, or listening for the positive intent. That's one of the best.
So Rule Omega comes from the conversation that I had with Jordan, where I was like, hey, I want to talk to you because I listened to something that I would consider a canonical conversation.
Right.
So it was that canonical conversation where that Rule Omega came from.
So Daniel expresses something, and let's say he's trying to express something that's hard, which, by the way, the Rule Omega is designed for that kind of a thing. Like, I'm not interested in having conversations that aren't actually trying to break new ground. So, okay, do it, dude. So he expresses something hard. And in the expression, 98% is noise and 2% is signal.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
And then obviously you said you saw that video. When I brought that up to him, he brought up his conversation with you. And so his understanding of what a canonical conversation or event might be was different than mine. And he, as far as I understand, was framing it in a way to where there was so much truth and honesty and beauty, and even maybe the presence of a third or a spirit, something that was between the two of you that prevented like some dishonesty or falsehood or something from kind of getting in. Like it was almost like a purifying shield within your conversation.
Like my conversation with Ken Lowry, like a couple weeks ago, that was closer to canonical. That was closer to canonical in my experience. And that had a feeling of just really presence, was guiding what was happening. And we were kind of along for the ride. And I don't have a sense that too much was, I don't have a concern that there was something in there that if somebody could receive that they would receive the wrong thing.
So he mentioned that. So first I want to ask you, like, how does that feel for him to say that about your conversation? And do you agree?
Yeah. It feels really good. I really appreciate that. It's something, it's an odd and wonderful sort of feeling to have people that you really look up to and have learned a lot from, to really sort of welcome you into friendship, into dialogue, into and give you sort of feedback that's really positive. I've been really, really blessed and fortunate to have that experience a couple of times. John Vervaeke has been very kind to me as well. So yes, I'm really happy about that. Right. But also I think I totally agree. I mean, that's, and you've done some of the dialectic into Dialogos.
I did. Yeah, I did. I did one of the sessions with John and Guy like over a weekend, and it didn't land for me like I wanted it to, and I can't completely judge or write off an approach like that just from one experience, but that was my experience. So I think it has more to do with the conversation partners that you might have, which I felt something like that with Jordan. Like I felt something like that with you here, and I think that has a little bit more to do with it. And it's but I'm sorry I interrupted. Where were you going to go with that?
No, that's great. I mean, that's because that for me, I think you're right. I think it's I think what we're talking about is what John tries to get at with this notion of dialogos, where you sort of the way of listening and attuning to each other is not about either of you particularly, but it's oriented towards something higher, such that whatever that higher thing is can actually start to take shape in a way that's dynamic and alive and draws you in, and you find yourself saying things that you don't know that you've never thought about before, and that sort of spirit and aliveness, it's not something that you can do by yourself, right? It's not something that you can create, and it's not something that as wonderful and as good as those weekends are, and I think they do a fantastic job, and they're continuing, of course, to evolve this, John and his team and Guy and Chris, but it's you can't force it again. And so I'm somewhat saddened to hear that it didn't fully land for you. But
it's almost okay. It's almost like you think of something like personality tests, right? If your company, your hospital, like made you do a personality test, and with your group, and you got something out of it, I would suspect that it was more the relationships that you had with those people, and the increased depth and the awareness that these are people that you're going to continue to have relationships, that's where the real juice was. And so the method of how you got there was so much less important than the fact that you were going there with these people. The who was more impactful than the how. Yeah,
and that it can be the best how in the world, but it can't bring in that thing that's beyond. It's deeper than the procedure, right? So I think for me, one of the things that I most highly prioritize when it comes to the cultivation of this character is the capacity to draw into conversations like that with people. And so I spend a lot of my attentional resources, and sometimes I get overly hypercritical in it, but to learn how to better listen to people, and how to not to really just for the sake of it's just such a wonderful feeling when you really get to be a part of a live conversation, and you get to participate with something, because you have to be, for me, my experience of something like Dialogos, it tends to occur when you're oriented towards something higher, when you're really good-heartedly trying to pursue something that's true, good, and beautiful, and it's just such a joy when that sort of fire sparks. And so that's what I'm really after. And I think Jordan to me is one of the people that is when you talk to Jordan, he's just right there.
Yes.
Like he's just right there, and he's not, he's just there. And if you don't have an agenda, if you're not trying to, if you just want to play, he'll just play, and you can just go. That's been my experience. And so that was a wonderful conversation. I really loved it.
Well, we're talking about alive conversations, and what's alive for me in this right now is John Vervaeke. We in your story we've got you to Jordan Peterson, and we know that Jordan and John worked together for a while. Is there a bridge from Jordan to John to you and John forming a friendship? How did you find John? I guess.
Yeah. I think it was the second conversation that John and Jordan had on his channel. I think it was maybe in, gosh, I remember what I was doing. Like, so we live on some property, and I was driving the tractor mowing a field, and I just, I had my headphones, and I saw it was like a new podcast from Jordan, and I know this looks interesting. I think he titled it like a conversation so intense it might be psychedelic or something like that.
Yes. That was exactly what it was.
That sounds interesting. So yeah, and so I clicked on it, and I listened. I thought, man, I don't know who this guy is, but he really seems to have an idea of what's going on. And so, then I went and found Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and it just, I mean, the world opened to me.
Wow.
I mean, I think the first time I went through Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, I did it, it was like 2 or 3 weeks, just went through it. And
because that's 50 hours, right? Like it's a 50 episode, 1 hour, lesson, YouTube series. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's dense.
And it's intense. Like, it's not just, slowly walking you through stuff. It is full tilt.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I had probably the most profound conversion experience I've ever had about halfway through that series, because I was sort of fighting with John through the series because he would say things and they would upset me, and they would trigger something of my Christian heritage, right?
And one of the things we should remember, and this is controversial to say, is Jesus does not anywhere in the Gospels present himself, right, as the means by which, right, we obtain forgiveness from God. He often presents himself as a way and things like that, and we'll talk about that.
I would go and I would wrestle around with it, and after a little while, I'd be like, "Oh, okay, that's what he's saying," and I just didn't understand it.
Huh.
And then at some point, I don't even remember anymore exactly what the thing was, but it was something about the participatory knowing and the notion of agape, like when he walks through what agape is and some of the Christian virtues.
Because what happens if we still, because we are still participating in the waters of Christianity within our culture, even if we're not Christians, and most of us aren't anymore, but how do we tap into all of this? The power of agape, acknowledging its reality, the participatory gnosis, the radical transformation, our own sense of not living up to the fullness of our personhood. What if we still experience all of that, but we do not have the machinery of Christianity with its metaphysics of cosmic redemption available to us?
It landed for me, like, what the notion of being born again might actually mean. And I remember, like, going into the shower, like a very sort of like classic story, right? Like I'm in the shower after listening to this and watching one of these videos, and I remember, like, I was crying, and I remember just praying over and over, like, I actually want to be born again. And like, I had prayed that prayer so many times as a child, and I thought I wanted that, but I had no idea what I wanted. Now I was like, oh, I think I might actually know what this means now. And yeah, that was a profound shift. And then I reached out to John. I became one of his Patreon supporters, and we had a couple of conversations, and then I ended up talking to him on his YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And then starting my own YouTube channel. And then since then, we've had a bunch of conversations and become friends. And
it's so neat. And, a lot of people love John from all sorts of different religious, backgrounds and perspectives. And the fact that your experience of him brought you to be a Christian when that wasn't his aim. Well, actually, let me walk that back, because he's actually said if what he does brings people sort of back home, that's an acceptable and even preferred outcome. even if that's not, exactly what he's trying to do with everybody. So he's like strangely evangelistic and can really generate very, very deep reflections. And obviously, your situation, I'm like thinking about the fact that you're having this born again experience while being covered in water, like your baptism and like the whole tears in the rain. And that's beautiful, man. That's
Yeah.
okay. And Sophia is something that John mentions a ton in that series. Was that the inspiration for your YouTube channel, YouTube naming, or did that predate, John's obsession with wisdom?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the name just sort of came to me, actually. Like I was just like, what name should I put here? And that just sort of came to me. I'd been reading the book Mount Analogue by René Daumal. Have you ever heard or read that book?
No, I don't think so.
I highly recommend. It's
Okay.
a fascinating book.
Okay, I'll look it up.
It's very worth reading. It's short, but it's a sort of symbolic mountain climbing, and then I think the notion of Sophia kind of from John at that point. Since then, it's sort of, I'm struggling a little bit here because Sophia has what's the right way to say this? Sophia has started off as a sort of concept for me that I think I picked up from John, but has since become something much more, and has
something alive.
Yeah, I mean, I've had several profound experiences with Sophia.
I mean, it's such a beautiful name. Like it's hard to say it and not like see an image. Like I see a woman's image. I see the beauty of some woman called Sophia.
Yeah. And so I had a couple of mystical experiences where I think Sophia showed up for me, and we had some interactions, and then I started reading. Thomas Merton has some really great stuff about Sophia, and then he's in my neck of the woods. Like, so I'll be in downtown Louisville next week, and there's like this spot where he had this experience, and it's like there's Fifth
a sign. I will take a picture there next week and tweet it to you. Okay.
Yes. Perfect. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome.
Yeah. Like his poem, Hagia Sophia, is so good. But also then, like Soloviev and Bulgakov, those Russian Sophiologists.
I heard you mention that to Jordan. Yeah.
And so anyway, sorry, that's getting a little bit. But yeah, I suppose it's difficult for me because there's been along this journey for me, there's this combination of deep sort of attempts to understand philosophical concepts and figure out how to arrange language in such a way that it can sort of maintain something. But also there's been these just profound mystical experiences that have incurred on me. And sometimes they're things, they happen in contexts where I'm particularly cultivating that. Sometimes they happen out of nowhere. The first time I met Sophia, I was just walking out of the woods on our property, and so and so it's hard to talk about those things,
right?
Because
transcends
in some sense,
language.
And
it would have to.
And it feels, and it feels so like unfaithful. There's a sense of fidelity that I feel to Sophia. That I'm just sort of hesitant of like how to place that. So anyway,
yeah. You know what? I'm feeling we can just sort of let your relationship with Sophia, remain private in the appropriate way that it is, and let's push it towards church.
Yeah.
So there's Sophia, there's the beauty of here, and then there's this idea of church, which drew us together, and What's coming up for you when I say church?
Well, I think the first thing that's most clear to me is sort of a curiosity about. I heard you, so I didn't finish the conversation with Jordan Hall. I watched up through the point where you you had talked about your experiences with church and the church splits and the canonical conversation that you referred to, which I think is around halfway through, and then it was time for this conversation. And so I find myself curious to know, like, when after you had those experiences, where did your relationship with church go, and where do you find yourself now?
So for me, I mean, I trained to be a pastor, and I was a pastor in a few of those different contexts. And then sort of when I reconciled with my first wife, there was a really powerful moment that actually happened at a church. I believe it was on Father's Day weekend. And they had a guest speaker come in. He's actually a pastor who's in Louisville. There's all these Louisville things going on in my head right now. And everything about what, those sermons where it's like, oh my gosh, the dude's talking to me. There's hundreds of people here, dozens of people here, thousands. He's talking to me. I felt that. Yeah. And it was like, as soon as it was time for, an altar call or something, it was like, out of my seat, I'm down there. The guy who married us, the pastor, was there to like hug me, sort of bring me back into the fold and all of that. But then I didn't end up back into that fold. And then I had this moment that I referred to where I sort of put this cloak of atheism on. I remember exactly where I was. I mean, I was listening to The God Delusion on audiobook, Richard Dawkins. And I was like, I haven't thought of it that way. I haven't thought of it that way. Well, and then tried it on. And that just broke something in the reconciliation attempts at that second marriage. And so, church is something that's powerful and mundane. It's like you get into a rhythm of it, and it's like, oh, we don't want to go. We got to get the kids dressed, blah, blah, blah. But it's enough of a rhythm to where it can keep you going through some challenging times. And all of a sudden, I'm staying home, and I'm saying, yeah, I don't think I believe this anymore, and I can't just go and fake it. And it's been sort of an in and out of that, with sort of if I'm being honest about what I believe, then I don't belong there. Yeah. And that's been like a dozen years. And my wife now, so I'm remarried. We've been married for over 8 years now. And we've been together for over 8 years. I need to remember exactly when our anniversary is, but she's also a devout Christian. And so the tension that sort of broke apart my relationship with my first wife, I think still attracted me to my second wife. Like her faith was still beautiful to me. Like I know that her faith is the source of so much of what is good about her. And then as my kids have become teenagers and making decisions of their own, they're making those same choices that I know are deeply, deeply sourced from their faith. And so I'm in this world, I'm in this community as somebody whose life would be so much easier if I could just, take that church pill, take that Jesus pill, and become a Christian again and attend church again. But I have to bring my whole self to it. And this reminds me of part of your conversation with Jordan again, where you're like, I've got to bring all of me to this. And so I'm heartened by Jordan's insistence that has to be the way, right?
I just showed up in this life with this particular set of, traumas that were given to me in relation to God. And now I'm like, no, I really want that thing. I really want that relationship with God. I really want that relationship with Christ. But I also need to be true to who I truly am. I'm not going to leave any parts of those behind. And so like coming back into that.
Well, there's no but there, right? Because I am the truth. You can't have a proper relationship with Christ if you are not fully in truth. Like there's no there's no alternative. So you actually had this other half over here, like that deepening of truth is a part of the coming back up here. And maybe that's been part of the journey that we collectively have been on for maybe a few generations, is kind of like a carving out of a new capacity to delve more deeply into truth so that we can actually develop more capacity to come more fully into relationship with Christ.
It's the way, the truth, and the life. And so I got invited to a church 2 weeks ago and went and participated. I actually talked about it the second half of that conversation, and feel connected with them, feel connected with these people. So we're in the Lenton season right now. I decided I was going to give up atheism for Lent. I've actually sort of, I've softened my self-identification from atheist to agnostic to humanist. I've sort of self-identified as a humanist for probably about 6-7 years now. But it was like, I'm just going to not do that. And Jordan actually asked me to pray. I didn't include it in our conversation, but he actually asked me to pray. And I told him, why are you asking me to pray? I don't believe in God that way. And I was like, oh, wait, I do, because I took the cloak off, I'm not an atheist for Lent. And so I prayed. And as I prayed, there was a power there. And it was praying for somebody else. And then somebody else kind of popped into my head, and I was like, ooh. And then I reached out to Jordan. I was like, hey, this kind of led me to pray for this other person. And he agreed. He's like, you're right. We need to both pray for these people. So that's in the last 2 weeks. So I'm praying, I'm going to church, and I'm talking to Ken Lowry right now. That's about as much as I can tell you about my relationship with church. And now it's your turn. Tell me about your relationship with church.
You have a wonderful way of telling stories. I like that. That was wonderful.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. I feel so much of that. It's been an evolving thing for me. I find that there's a video on my channel from, I don't know, maybe a year ago with Paul Vanderklay called "What is Christianity?" Because there was a period of time where I was like, what are we even talking about when we use this word Christian and Christianity? Like,
I've kind of stopped using it, but it's still like you're forced to use it. And so I'm trying to grapple with, like, how do I use this term and this language to refer to this like behemoth of a thing?
Right.
But it's anyway. So that's my issue.
I didn't hear a question. I see your reality. I see the problem, and to see the problem says a lot of good things about you, because in some ways, for Christians, Christianity is reality. Like Christ is reality.
There's too much to trace out here. I've been wrestling with this for years because I haven't been to church since COVID. COVID was sort of a convenient, like, okay, we're going to stop going to church for a little while. And then after a little while, my wife and I were like, yeah, we don't miss that. We're way closer to God now. So like, we're not doing that. And then at different points, I've deeply considered letting go of the notion of being a Christian at all. I've never sort of like become like anti-God, and certainly not, or like against Christianity. Like, but I just sort of became ambivalent to it a few times. But I would always have this experience. Like I'm very interested in especially like Zen Buddhism and Taoism, and I had some really I experienced some real help from even some of the Hindu type things, and I would sort of like, okay, I think I can let go of Jesus and this Christianity thing for a bit here, and then I would have and then I would be meditating, and all of a sudden Jesus would pop up, and he would be like, hey, how's it going?
Remember me?
And yeah, and I was like, every time I turned around, no matter where I went, it was like, oh, Jesus is right there. And his sort of his response to me, because I would talk to him about these sort of things, and he would always say something like, yeah, it's fine, like, you're just trying to figure it out, and like, I'll be here with you, like, you're good. And that's sort of been the sense with it ever all throughout. And so where I'm at now is I feel like, you know, Christianity, for whatever all we think it is, that the philosophy, the sense of being a human being that we have in the West is so profoundly grounded in Christianity that you can't get out of it. I really don't think we can. I think it's the water that we all drink, and we cannot separate ourselves from it. Now, I think what happens is we all have so much trauma in relation to the church. Like, one of the things that the church and the establishment, the institution of Christianity, has done for a long time, and I think this is a mistake, but it's treated the what Jung would call the shadow side of ourselves, the impulses, these sorts of things. It's treated them with a repressive and excising sort of attitude, right? We need to get rid of this. This needs to go away, push it down, you know, like cut it off. And I think what's happened as that happens is that, you know, that nothing ever goes away. Like, human beings, we fundamentally cannot make or destroy anything. All we can do is move things around. Like, I find that to be a pretty important thing to, like, that was a huge thing for me to realize. It's like, I can't create or destroy any thought, any emotion, any material for sure, but I can move things around and I can change how they relate to each other. And so I think that all of the things that maybe mostly well-meaning people, although there were certainly some bad actors in the pot, in all the things that were attempted to be pushed down and repressed and cut off by the church and its leadership over time has just sort of, you know, been playing on the margin, and all that pain and all that stuff is still there. And then over time, that's finally built up, right? And now we have this crazy confrontation of the church with its own shadow. I think that's sort of like where we live right now. And it's like, so what I have found is that I think my inability to go and participate in church has to do with my particular part of that shadow that I still carry, that gets triggered when I go to church. And that's different than philosophical, ethical, metaphysical arguments that I have about God or Jesus or heaven and earth, and, you know, all that other stuff. It's like, that's one thing, and then the actual experience of the church is another. But I think that a lot of us, and I certainly did this for a long time, took that, like, angst, that difficulty, that sort of difficult energy in relation to the church and the wounding and that shadow, and tried to transfer it into like philosophical critiques and you know, needing this all to change, when in reality it was, you know, there's a relationship issue.
Yeah, that was something that was really alive for me in your conversation with Jordan, and how he described the idea of, if you're approaching God from that sort of detached, this is something I can examine kind of perspective, instead of something that the words fail, but it's like it is something that you have to experience. Like, that's the key part of his story for me. It's not like, here's a guy who has gone through and examined things to such an impressive level of detail of, like, how do you do life at a personal level, at a family level, at a tribal level, society. Like, he's looked at and explored all these different things, and then he's like, you know what, I'm gonna go all the way in with this Christian thing, which is a transformation of my identity. It's a union with Christ, not I'm gonna try on this one other thing too, from a detached perspective.
You're still fundamentally grounded over here, and you've kind of put all this stuff over there, but as it turns out, it's all a simulation. And that's where it gets really, really ugly. It gets to be a mess. Now, of course, the beautiful thing is Christ is not confused by what you're about, right?
Yeah.
He'll continue to work on that one piece. Is going to have all kinds of trials and tribulations until that one piece finally goes in mercy, right? The mercy comes to that piece, and then mercy goes, okay, are you ready? Yeah. Here's good news. The good news is my yoke is light. Here's good news. You are, in fact, immersed fully, completely in a faithful love. This is all, you can just surrender into this, because this is the place that you've yearned for, but you don't have to be the one who creates it, but you never could have anyway.
Totally. But I mean, how often is our modern perspective of Christianity and the experience of being a believer and participating in Christ not participative at all, but in fact just a sort of, I'm just going to try this on. This is just a piece of my life. I go to church, I say the prayer, I'm good.
Yeah.
And I think, in a sense, that's sort of, at least for me, what I rebelled against. I was like, this isn't a real thing. Like, whatever it is that this is supposed to be doing for me, it's not doing it. And then, in sort of walking away from that, I actually found Jesus.
So do you feel any sort of, when I ask you a question like this, or Paul asks you a question, like, do you feel some sort of calling or pulling to look under those rocks again in your sort of local community?
Yeah, I mean, and we're, my wife and I are sort of always having this conversation of like, when do we, I think it's more of a question of like, when and where do we want to go back to church? And, every time it comes around, there's different times and seasons where it's more alive and less alive. And every time it comes around, it's sort of like, for a while, it was super painful. Like I would get really bought into it, and it was all this stuff about anxiety about hell and judgment, and these sorts of things would come up and sort of take me over. And then I would feel compelled, like I had to go to church, and I would go to church and be this negative experience. And I'd be like, whoa, what's going on? And I'd throw it all off again. And so like, I've done that cycle a bunch of times, and it's a little bit less traumatic every time it comes around now. But I don't know, I've sort of reached this place with it where I have a lot more, I guess, sort of, I don't know if patience is the right word, but
it's a good word. It means one who suffers.
I'm just sort of watching it happen, and like, I want to be a part of a church. I would like that. I would like to. I mean, I think that'd be great. I think for all the reasons like that were in Paul and Jordan's conversation that I was a part of, about the usefulness, the validity, the maybe even necessity of that level of community. Like I would like that, but like, I'm just, and I hope it comes back for me at some point. And, we'll go to a church and it'll be like, maybe go for a little while, and I don't know.
Do you have folks that you've connected with through this sort of internet world that actually live near you in your geography that you've had like in-person conversations with? Like, can you meet up at a coffee shop with any of those folks?
Not so much that. I've met several people, and like I have some ongoing dialogues with people over text and voice chats and things like that have been super helpful. But in person, I saw it 2.5 years ago. I started a group with some guys from the gym, because I started just trying to emulate Socrates in my interaction. So I'm sort of known around this. Yeah. So I'm known around the gym and the hospital, the places where I go, as this, I don't think anyone would associate with Socrates, but this person who will, challenge people to conversations, have philosophical conversations, drop people into things. And I was having great conversations at the gym, so I just said, hey, let's get together at a coffee shop every Thursday morning at 6 a.m. And that's been 2.5 years ago, and there's anywhere from 10 to 18 guys that show up. And it's very similar to Paul Vanderklay's Estuary. Sure. Although I didn't know anything about that when I started, but it turns out it's quite similar. And so that's actually that's probably the most church thing that I have going right now.
Yeah. Well, and Paul would definitely and has said many times that is not church.
An estuary is a place usually where fresh water from a continent or an island flows out into the sea. And in biological terms, estuaries are one of the most diverse, productive, and interesting biomes that we know of. So churches are supposed to reach out to others who don't believe in God or don't believe as they do. And most of those people don't want to go anywhere near a church because of all the games that churches play. I have always, as a minister who had small groups and Bible studies, I could tell that people in church would adjust the answers. The answers, they would doctor their speech in order to say the kinds of things that people want to hear them say in church.
But I'd be interested to know why not.
And shouldn't the church be a place where that person can walk in and say, I think Jesus is an asshole. Look how he talked to this foreign woman. I want a church where people can walk in there and lay that on the table and not have everyone say, oh,
how dare you, sir?
How dare you? Flee from here, you.
Where's my fainting couch? Okay.
You know, like the way that I'm, oversimplistically, referring to church, is the called out ones. It's like you guys are at the gym and you called these men out into, this kind of fellowship. That's the word that's super alive for me right now is fellowship. So in Jordan and John's conversation, have you listened to that one yet?
Oh
yeah.
Gosh.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's like part one. It's like Dune. It's like Dune part one. Oh, you got to do the part two. And of course they did. And it's amazing. But I can't wait for that. The next level of that after the table was sort of set.
I sort of spilled my guts in front of you and you took it up in good faith and with graciousness. And you responded in kind, which I appreciate. So thank you for that. And I look forward to our next conversation. And I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, that conversation, like, there's been so many things that I've been, like, trying to figure out how to say to John that I just watched Jordan say to John in that conversation, which was just so wonderful.
The last word I'll take is to just express to you my tremendous gratitude. And the shape of that gratitude at this moment is just for the diligence and the care that you put into what you do. Well, in some sense, it shames me, but it's a good shame. It's the motivating shame to step up. And it's let's just put it there. Just a tremendous gratitude. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
And I love that conversation. But yeah, I mean, this notion of fellowship, to me, I don't know.
Can I just point out the fact that it's also fellows or fellas? Like it's a men's group, right? Am I understanding that right?
Yeah.
So I know fellowship doesn't imply just masculinity, but just the fact that you've got sort of all these sort of men together. We could bring Jordan Peterson back into this, I guess, if we wanted to, but just the idea of the fellowship of the Spirit. I think that was the term that Jordan used at the end of that conversation. Like that hit home.
Interestingly, I found myself having an experience over the past 2 weeks that I've been calling the fellowship of the Spirit. And I mean this in terms of actual specific individuals. I'm beginning to notice that perhaps you're a member of this thing, and I'm calling it the fellowship of the Spirit.
Yeah. And that, for me, it's that really the most profound felt sense of fellowship, like the felt sense that comes with that word, is the sort of thing that we were talking about before with Dialogos. It's like that there's a vertical relationship that emerges when you're present with another person pursuing something, that your souls open up to each other. And that the Spirit starts to play in that space, and what emerges from it is a deepening and widening of the world that's such a profound
it's the z-axis, right? It's the z-axis.
A little bit like it's not a bad metaphor of saying, okay, I've got XYZ dimensions in a three-dimensional space, but we'll make you the villain in this. You've got only X and Y. And so I'm trying to explain Z to you, and you're moving around X and Y like crazy. And it's like, no, you don't get it. It's not more or less X. It's not more or less Y.
Right.
It's Z. Yeah. So something like that.
Yes, it's the depth that comes in.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
How does that, like, tell me more about, so you said the fellowship's been really alive. Like, how does that resonate?
Yes,
and,
yes.
Like, what
So for me, the whole Rebel Wisdom experience led me to their what ended up being their final men's retreat. So felt a very clear call to go to London. Never been to Europe before in my life. Go to London. I was Ted Lasso. I went over there. I'm the only American in this group of a bunch of European, mostly British men, and had an amazing, powerful men's retreat experience. And there was Dialogos, there was presence, there was actual inspiration. So that there was a deep breathwork session on the Saturday night of the retreat that was, I mean, I had a mystical experience. Like I experienced my birth through my mother's eyes.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. Wow. 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 Wow.
And I'm just like, I don't know if I would have been that comfortable if it would have been sort of a mixed, gender kind of situation. Like it was so amazing how quickly we got deep in that context. And so at the very end of the retreat, you kind of have to make a commitment. And my commitment was like, I'm going to be a fisher of men, and I'm going to go home and call the others. And so I went and had a couple of men's retreats back in Indiana where I'm at, and they were amazing, and it had, own little kind of twists of other things that were sort of, powerful for me over the years, some hero's journey stuff. It is because that wasn't sort of like, hey, we went into this deep thing together, but then we won't see each other again because we're internet friends or whatever. Like the Dialectic into Dialogos workshop was great, but I haven't talked to any of those people since then. But I do life with these men in the same community. And there's an organic sort of sharing and expanding of what we experienced that has started to happen in some of their other relationships. And we're able to really kind of hold each other accountable to the things we committed to when we got to those deepest places together.
Yeah. Yes. That's
and so
wonderful.
It's like, we like the one that's coming up in particular is I have had a difficult time telling my kids that I love them, which not because I don't love them, but things happen to where that has become hard. And there's another gentleman on one of our retreats who felt the same way. And so now we use it with each other to practice. And every time we say it to each other, it's a reminder back to that moment of like, no, remember, this is also something that we committed to say to our kids. Let's use it. Let's use the language, and let's remind each other what we committed to.
That's really good.
So whether that's church or not, I don't know, but it's deep. It's high at that level that you were talking about when the Spirit comes in. So I'm totally fine with calling it the fellowship of the Spirit.
But that I love. One of the things that I'm hearing you talk about there is the capacity to help stitch each other together. Like one of the things is that we don't know who we are, and so we're trying to learn how to stitch together the through line of our lives, such that we can actually feel like we're a thing, not a thing, but like a cohesive, coherent, integrated being, right? And it's like it's really hard to do.
And it integrates. When you say integration and when you say stitch together, I see wounds. Like you're stitching together to where that body has broken apart. And when you say integrate, it's like we're gonna naturally go around, projecting our most positive, versions of ourselves to others. But the people that know us deepest and can look back at us with grace can remind us that we must be an integrated person, which is that pain.
Yes. Yes, yes. And when we have relationships like that, where we actually have a continual touchstone, we're coming into deep knowing by conforming with another person, another soul who we can genuinely trust, and we can genuinely, trust in the sense of allow them to reflect back to us what we are in such a way that we can take that in deeply and have that, have that inform this sort of the trajectory that we're on, right? It can help mold us into who we could become, but it also help, like you said, bind up those wounds in the past. And fellowship as the communion of individuals that affords something like that collective and individual stitching together of a through line in an upward fashion. I mean, that feels pretty good in terms of what fellowship might be.
Well, that fellowship has turned into some form of church. The church that I was invited into and participating in, it was two of the guys from these Fellowship of the Spirit retreats. And we actually take the first Sunday of the month off. So tomorrow we're actually off, and I'm going to have one of my dearest friends in the chair was with me. I'm gesturing behind me to where I would be in my studio with these hair chairs. And we're going to talk about what it's been like because he's on our same journey of like, he's away from church, but thinks about God and Jesus all the time. And so we're going to try and have church together and fellowship and Dialogos in person. And I'm so grateful that you were able to make this work. The timing seemed to work, really well for us to land into something. And I just want to kick it back to you at the end. Is there anything bubbling up that you'd want to share to help us kind of land this plane together?
Yeah, I think, I'm struck again by how we can find people who are genuinely trying to participate in life and come into relation with what's good. And yeah, I so much I've appreciated, sort of our passing interactions, the ships in the night, but also getting to talk to you has just been a joy. And so, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the next time will be in person, but if it's virtual again, it won't be too soon.
Fair enough. Thank you, sir.
I'm just Ken, and I'm enough, and I'm great at doing stuff.